Good morning, everybody. Now, many of you in your RE lessons already this week have been thinking about being a refugee, and there are so many different countries all over the world where it's not a safe place to live, and people don't want to live where their life is in danger or their children might be at risk of being killed, and so they leave their country to find somewhere else to live. And I don't think we quite looked at the word refugee in the RE lessons this week, but if you think about taking cover, hiding, that's the word refuge. If you are escaping from something and you suddenly find somewhere where you can just take cover and be safe, that's called refuge. And so perhaps when people were in battle and they were running away from the enemy, they might have found a barn to hide in. They might have found an old church building to hide in. And that is known as taking refuge. And it's a safe place that can protect them from the enemy for a short period of time. Well, sadly, there are people fleeing even from their own countries for safety, and they then take refuge in other countries. Now, some of these people travel a very, very long way to get to somewhere where they know they can be safe. So if you have a little look on the map behind me, many people have come from this part of Africa, from the east of Africa, particularly from Ethiopia and Sudan, where there's been a lot of war, and many of these people have actually come into Europe. And even within Africa, there are countries where people have been part of civil war, where one tribe is fighting against another tribe, and the local people are caught in the middle, and so they flee and they run. And in other parts of the world, particularly here around northern India, in a country called Myanmar, actually, or it used to be called Burma, the different religions, if you're a Muslim or a Hindu, you worship and live in a very different way. And so people who are not part of the right religious groups are forced to flee because they might well be killed for what they believe in. And so it's a really big world problem with people groups, whole groups of people, maybe thousands of people, fleeing one country and going to take refuge in another. Now, it's very tricky for the countries that are receiving these refugees, these escaping people. It's very tricky for a town that might not have enough houses for thousands of people to come and live. And so what usually happens is that when these people leave their countries, when they escape all the war and maybe famine where they don't have enough food, when they escape these places, they will land in another country and just have to make a tent, or they might just have to make a bit of a shelter for themselves. Quite often countries will donate money towards building proper camps so that they've got big tents or they've got shelters with proper roofs, but again, there might only just be bits of corrugated steel. Now, living in a refugee camp, living in a place which is not proper housing, is not a safe place to live for very long. It might be safe from the soldiers that were in your home country, but it won't be safe from diseases. It won't be safe from people not having enough food. So quite often when you've got thousands of people all living in this temporary tent-like accommodation, there will be disease, and people don't have toilets or showers or the hygiene that we need to keep ourselves fit and well. And so disease spreads from person to person to person really quickly. And you know what it's like when you've been poorly and you've been sick, or you might have had diarrhea. It's a really horrible feeling in your tummy, isn't it? but it's actually quite infectious, and you're supposed to stay at home for 2 days if you've been sick at home. Well, if you're in a refugee camp, diarrhea and sickness will infect lots of people altogether, and there won't be bathrooms and toilets for them to go and be sick in. So it's not a very pleasant thing. I'm sorry not to be talking about very pleasant things, but it is something that this week across the world we are remembering. I don't want to say celebrating. You don't really celebrate World Refugee Week, but we do concentrate on it and think about what are the things that we can do to help those people living in our country who are refugees. Now, some people have said that people coming out of countries to come and live in our country aren't always running away from or escaping horrible situations. They might be people arriving because they like the thought of Britain and it's clean and has a good hospital system, and they might be able to get better work. But many people are coming to our country because they are running away from and escaping really awful situations. And I think most of you in your RS lessons have watched a little video of a child's story or a young person's story. Now, I have in fact filmed myself in my garden to imagine that I am a refugee living in a cardboard house. So I'm going to play that for you now, and you can see what it might look like to be living outside. Do you know, it's really cold and wet out today. The sunshine seems to have faded, and I want you to imagine that I don't have a nice, warm, dry house to be able to sit in and be cosy with my family. I want to imagine that I've had to live for the last 3 months underneath this cardboard shelter, which has to keep being changed regularly because it gets wet when it rains. And at night time, I've got my blanket. Not a very comfortable wooden pallet, but it's better than the ground. And this is how refugees need to exist until they find their real homes. It's not comfortable. I can't go to the loo or have a hot bath. I can't go to the fridge and get all the food out that I really like. I've begun to make some nice friends, some of the other mums, but my own children are playing in the street or sometimes being shouted at by other children because they don't look like them. So, although it's hard to imagine that's what life could be like for me, I know that millions of people do live like that all over the world. In fact, you know, it says that there are 65 million people who live as refugees in the world. 65 million is the same number of people that are in the whole of the United Kingdom. That's a lot of people. Now, I can tell you it did feel quite cold and wet sitting in my garden this morning underneath the rain. I hope that you never have to experience that in terms of that would be your only place to live. But it wasn't totally realistic. It was only a little bit of an idea of what refugees' living conditions are like. I'm going to show you some photos now of real refugee camps from around the world, and some of them look very different. And in fact, I was told by my daughter, you can't use cardboard, mummy, because your roof will get really wet in the garden. And I said, well, actually, in real refugee camps, they would use plastic sheeting to make some of those roofs. So let's have a look at some of the photos from around the world. So as we come to the end of World Refugee Week, I would like you to remember all of those families and children who have gone through quite a lot of difficult times. And although we can't always do anything particularly about it, we don't have any refugee children here at Lea Hurst Swan, there may come a day when you do have to interact with a refugee family. There may come a time when somebody needs to seek refuge in your town, or maybe even in your school. So I want you to just remember that their journey to get here has been an incredible one. And I think the resilience and the ability to stand firm in difficult circumstances, which is what resilience means, is something that refugee families have learned how to really cope with all of these unfortunate events. We shouldn't allow people to live in those dreadful conditions. Those photos that showed thousands of people packed into tiny areas, we shouldn't allow them to live there for as long as they do. And so we want to encourage governments and countries to provide better accommodation and better aid for those families. And I would love to encourage you to therefore just count your blessings and appreciate your families and appreciate your home life and appreciate your fabulous fridge full of food, and to think about all the things that we can say thank you for. Thanking our parents for having made us a lovely dinner, thanking our parents for all the lovely things that we can play with at home. So enjoy your weekend, enjoy your family time, and we look forward to seeing some of you in school next week. So it would be wonderful to be able to welcome more of you back through the doors. So until that time, God bless.